August 1992. Alberta, Canada. The middle of nowhere. The set of Unforgiven was a brutal place to work. Remote locations, harsh weather, long days that started before sunrise and ended long after dark. Clint Eastwood was directing and starring in what he believed might be the most important film of his career, a revisionist Western that would either cement his legacy or prove that he'd lost his touch. Nobody knew which one it would be. Not yet. The production was running smoothly by Hollywood standards. Clint's sets were famous for their efficiency. No wasted time. No endless takes. No directorial tantrums or actor meltdowns. You showed up, you did your job, you went home. Simple. But on the 14th day of shooting, something happened that threatened to blow it all apart. Morgan Freeman had been cast as Ned Logan, the aging outlaw who comes out of retirement to join William Money for one last job. It was a crucial role, the moral center of the film, the character whose fate would define the entire third act. Freeman was perfect for it. Everyone knew that. His quiet dignity, his natural authority, his ability to convey entire histories with a single look. But Morgan Freeman was also a serious actor with serious opinions about his craft. And on day 14, those opinions collided with Clint Eastwood's directing style in a way that nobody expected. The scene was simple enough on paper. Ned and William Money sitting by a campfire, talking about the old days, about the men they used to be and the men they'd become. Two old friends reconnecting after years apart. The dialogue was sparse, the way Clint liked it. Most of the scene would be carried by looks, by silences, by the unspoken history between these characters. They did the first take. Clint said, "Cut," and nodded. "Good. Moving on." Freeman's head snapped up. "Moving on? We just did one take. That's all we need." "Clint, I barely found the character in that take. I was just warming up. We need to do it again." "No, we don't." The crew felt the temperature drop. This wasn't a polite disagreement. This was two immovable forces meeting head-on. Freeman stood up from his position by the prop campfire. He was 55 years old, had been acting for over 3 decades, and had very specific ideas about how scenes should be developed. In his experience, the best performances came from exploration, from trying different approaches, from letting the scene breathe and evolve over multiple takes. Clint's approach was the opposite. Capture the spontaneity. Get it while it's fresh. Don't let actors overthink their way into something artificial. Both approaches had merit. Both had produced great films. But they were fundamentally incompatible, and right now they were on a collision course. "One take isn't enough," Freeman said, his voice carrying that deep authority that made him impossible to ignore. "This scene is the heart of the movie. It's where the audience connects with Ned, understands who he is, why he matters. We need to explore it." Clint was still sitting in his director's chair, calm as always. "We got what we need, Morgan. The scene works. I saw it. You saw one version, one interpretation. There are others. Better ones, maybe. But we'll never know because you won't let me find them. I hired you because you're good enough to get it right the first time. If I didn't think that, you wouldn't be here. That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." They stared at each other. Around them, 70 crew members tried very hard to be invisible. Nobody wanted to be caught in the middle of this. Freeman took a step toward Clint's chair. His jaw was tight. His eyes were hard. This wasn't just about a scene anymore. This was about respect, about being heard, about having a voice in the creation of something important. "You know what your problem is, Clint? You think directing is about control, about getting exactly what you see in your head onto the screen. But that's not directing. That's dictating. Real directing is collaboration. It's letting your actors bring something you didn't expect. It's being surprised, being challenged. You don't want collaborators, you want puppets." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody talked to Clint Eastwood like that. Nobody. He was a legend, an icon, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. Directors half his age wouldn't dare challenge him. And here was Morgan Freeman, calling him a dictator on his own set. Clint's face was unreadable. That famous stoic expression that had served him in 100 westerns, 100 confrontations on screen. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. "You finished?" Clint asked quietly. "No, I'm not finished." Freeman was committed now. There was no backing down. "I've worked with great directors, Sidney Pollack, Christopher Reeve, people who understood that actors aren't props, they're artists. They have instincts and ideas and the ability to make scenes better than anything in the script. But you don't want that. You want efficiency. You want to come in under budget and ahead of schedule. And you're willing to sacrifice the art to get it." The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Then Freeman said the words that everyone would remember. "I don't think I can work like this, Clint. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should never have taken this role. Because if this is how the rest of the shoot is going to go, if I'm just going to be a body hitting marks and saying lines while you check boxes on your shot list, then I can't do it. I won't do it." He took a breath. "Find someone else." The words echoed across the set. Morgan Freeman had just quit Unforgiven. 2 weeks into production. The second lead, gone. Clint still hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shown any emotion at all. He just sat there looking at Freeman with those pale eyes that revealed nothing. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small chuckle, barely audible. But in the silence of that set, it sounded like thunder. "You done?" Clint asked again. Freeman blinked. The laugh had thrown him off balance. "What?" "I asked if you're done because if you're done, I'd like to say something." Freeman crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Clint stood up slowly from his chair. He walked toward Freeman until they were standing face to face. 2 tall men. 2 legends. 2 stubborn artists who believed completely in their own vision. "You're right," Clint said. Whatever Freeman had expected, it wasn't that. "What?" "You're right, about some of it anyway. I do want control. I do value efficiency. I do prefer getting it right the first time instead of doing 20 takes searching for something that might not exist. That's how I work. It's how I've always worked. And it's produced some pretty good films." He paused. "But here's what you're wrong about. I didn't hire you to be a puppet. I hired you because you're Morgan Freeman. Because when I read this script and imagined Ned Logan, I saw your face. I heard your voice. I knew you could bring something to this role that nobody else could. Something I couldn't plan or script or direct into existence. Something that only happens when the right actor meets the right material." Freeman was listening now. Really listening. "That first take we did," Clint continued, "it wasn't perfect. You're right about that. You were still finding the character, still settling in. But you know what I saw? I saw truth. I saw 2 old men who've done terrible things trying to figure out if they're still capable of doing them again. I saw history between them that doesn't need to be explained because it's written on your face and Jean's face and in the way you look at each other." Clint shook his head. "I don't need you to find the character, Morgan. You are the character. You've been Ned Logan your whole life. Everything you've experienced, everything you've survived, everything you've learned, it's all right there. I just need you to let it out." And you did. In one take. Freeman was quiet for a long moment. The anger was draining from his face, replaced by something more complicated. "Then why won't you let me try again? Why won't you let me explore?" "Because exploration is a trap," Clint said. "I've seen it 100 times. An actor does a great first take, instinctive, raw, true. Then they start thinking. They do another take, trying to recreate what worked. Then another, trying to improve it. And by take 7 or take 15, they've lost whatever made that first one special. They've thought their way out of the truth and into performance." He put his hand on Freeman's shoulder. "I'm not trying to control you, Morgan. I'm trying to protect you. Protect that thing you do naturally, that thing you can't fake. That's what I want on screen. Not a performance. The real thing. Freeman looked at Clint for a long time. The crew was still frozen, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. "You really think one take was enough?" "I know it was, but here's what I'll do." Clint smiled slightly. "We'll watch it together. Tonight. Just you and me. If you still think we need to redo it after you see what I saw, we'll come back tomorrow and shoot it again. As many takes as you want. Deal?" Freeman considered this. It was a compromise. A real one. Something he hadn't expected from Clint Eastwood. "Deal," he said finally. They shook hands. The set exhaled. 70 people started breathing again. Clint turned to his AD. "We're moving on to scene 42. Set up at the ridge. We've got 3 hours of good light left." Just like that, it was over. The confrontation that had threatened to derail the entire production was resolved in 10 minutes. No drama, no lingering tension, just two professionals finding a way to work together. But something had changed. Everyone could feel it. That night, Clint and Morgan sat in a small screening room watching the dailies from that day's shoot. The campfire scene came up. Freeman watched himself on screen, watched the way the firelight played across his face, watched the silences between the words. When it was over, he sat in the dark for a long time. "You were right," he said finally. "It's all there. Everything I was looking for. I couldn't feel it while I was doing it." "That's because you were too busy thinking about what you were going to do next, instead of just being there, being present." Freeman nodded slowly. "Is that what you meant when you said exploration is a trap?" "That's part of it. The other part is simpler. First takes have an energy that can't be recreated. The actor doesn't know what's coming. They're discovering the scene in the moment, same as the audience will discover it later. That discovery is what makes it feel real. You try to recreate it, you lose the discovery. You're just showing people something you already found. It's the difference between a live performance and a recording." Freeman absorbed this. It was a philosophy he'd never fully considered before. His training, his experience, everything had told him that preparation and exploration were the keys to great performance. But Clint was suggesting something different, something almost zen. "How did you figure this out?" Clint was quiet for a moment. "Sergio Leone taught me. Not directly. He didn't speak English and I didn't speak Italian. But I watched him work, watched how he used actors. He'd set up these incredible shots, hours of preparation, and then he'd turn to me and say, 'Go. That's it, just go.' And whatever happened in that moment, that's what ended up in the film. But you rehearsed those scenes. You prepared. I prepared. But the preparation was about being ready for anything, not about planning what I was going to do. There's a difference. A boxer prepares by training, by studying his opponent, by getting in shape. But when the bell rings, he doesn't follow a script. He reacts. He responds. He lets his training guide him without thinking about it." Freeman smiled. "So, acting is like boxing. Everything is like boxing, if you look at it, right?" They both laughed, and in that small screening room in Alberta, Canada, something was born. Not just mutual respect. Something deeper. Friendship. Over the next 6 weeks, Clint and Morgan became close. They ate meals together, talked late into the night, shared stories from their long careers. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both were sons of the working class who'd made it in Hollywood against the odds. Both valued craft over ego. Both believed that the work mattered more than the awards. When they disagreed about a scene, which happened often, they'd argue it out with passion and honesty. But there was no more talk of quitting, no more accusations of dictatorship. They'd found a way to challenge each other without threatening each other, a way to push toward something better without losing what was already good. Unforgiven wrapped on schedule, under budget, just like all of Clint's films. But this one was different. Everyone who worked on it knew something special had happened. The chemistry between the actors, the depth of the performances, the way every scene felt true and earned. This wasn't just another Western. This was something that would last. In December 1992, Unforgiven was released. Critics called it a masterpiece. Audiences lined up around the block. And when Oscar nominations were announced, the film received 9 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director for Clint, and Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman. Morgan Freeman wasn't nominated. His performance was praised, but the Academy overlooked him that year. It was a snub that many people found outrageous. But Morgan didn't complain. He didn't give bitter interviews or launch campaigns for recognition. When asked about it, he simply said, "The work speaks for itself. Awards are nice, but they're not why I do this." Clint called him the night the nominations were announced. "You should have been nominated," Clint said. "The film doesn't exist without you." "The film exists because you made it. I just showed up and did my job." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Morgan laughed. "Maybe, but it's true. You were right, by the way, about all of it, about first takes, about being present, about protecting actors from themselves. I've been thinking about it ever since we wrapped. It changed how I see my own work." "I learned something, too," Clint admitted, "about listening, about letting people be heard even when you think you know better. You pushed back on me in a way nobody had in years. I needed that." "I almost quit your movie." "I know. And if you had, Unforgiven would have been half the film it is. The fact that you stayed, that we figured it out, that's what made it work." There was a pause on the line. "We should do this again sometime," Morgan said. "I was thinking the same thing." They made good on that promise. Over the next 20 years, Morgan Freeman and Clint Eastwood worked together on 4 more films: $1 Million Baby, Invictus, and others where they collaborated in various ways. Each time the dynamic was the same. They'd argue, they'd push each other, they'd disagree passionately about shots, scenes, interpretations, and then they'd find a way through, together. In 2005, $1 Million Baby won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Morgan finally got his recognition, winning Best Supporting Actor for his performance as Eddie "Scrap Iron" Dupree. When he walked to the stage to accept his Oscar, he looked into the audience and found Clint Eastwood. "You know," Morgan said from the podium, "there's a story about the first time I worked with Clint. On Unforgiven. About 2 weeks in, we had a disagreement. A big one. I said some things I probably shouldn't have said. I might have used the word dictator. I might have threatened to quit." The audience laughed. Clint smiled slightly. "But here's what happened next. Instead of firing me, instead of putting me in my place, Clint listened. He explained his vision. He made room for mine. And then we made something beautiful together. That's who Clint Eastwood really is. Not the tough guy from the movies. A collaborator, a teacher, a friend." He held up the Oscar. "This is as much his as it is mine. Thank you, Clint, for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself, for pushing me to be better, and for being stubborn enough to fight for what you believed while being wise enough to know when to bend." The camera cut to Clint, who nodded once. That was all. No tears, no elaborate reaction. Just a nod of acknowledgement between 2 men who understood each other completely. Years later, in 2014, Morgan Freeman was interviewed about his career. The interviewer asked him about his favorite collaborations, about working with great directors, about the films that meant the most to him. Morgan was quiet for a long time before he answered. "The day I argued with Clint Eastwood on the set of Unforgiven was the most important day of my professional life. And I don't mean because of what happened in the scene. I mean because of what happened after." "What do you mean?" "I thought I knew how to act. I'd been doing it for 30 years. I had my process, my methods, my beliefs about what makes a performance work. And then Clint showed me something different, something I'd never considered. He showed me that sometimes the best work happens when you stop trying to work, when you just let it happen." He paused. "I called him a dictator that day. Said he wanted puppets, not collaborators. I was wrong. He wanted something much harder than puppets. He wanted truth. And getting truth out of actors is the hardest thing a director can do. Most of them settle for performance. Clint won't settle for anything less than real. What's the most important thing you learned from him? Morgan thought about it. The trusting yourself doesn't mean trusting your thoughts. It means trusting your instincts, your preparation, your years of work, all the things that make you who you are. Clint taught me to get out of my own head and let the work happen through me instead of being controlled by me. It sounds mystical, but it's actually very practical. Stop thinking. Start being. That's the secret. Do you still work that way? Every day. Every role. First take, I try to give everything. Not hold back for later takes. Not save my best stuff. Just empty out completely, right from the start. Most of the time, that first take ends up in the movie, just like Clint said it would. The interviewer smiled. So, he converted you. Morgan laughed. That warm, rich laugh that had become one of the most beloved sounds in cinema. He didn't convert me. He freed me. There's a difference. I was so worried about doing things right that I forgot why I started acting in the first place. For the joy of it. For the discovery. For that moment when you don't know what's going to happen next and you have to trust yourself to find it. He leaned back in his chair. Clint Eastwood gave me that back. On a cold day in Alberta, 30 years ago, when I was ready to quit his movie because I thought he didn't understand. Turns out he understood better than I did. He just had to help me see it. Clint and Morgan are still friends. They don't see each other as often as they used to. Both are in their 90s now, both slowing down, both looking back at careers that exceeded anything they could have imagined. But they still talk on the phone, still argue about movies they've seen, still push each other's thinking about craft and art and what it means to create something true. A few years ago, someone asked Clint about his favorite actors to work with. He mentioned several names. But when he got to Morgan Freeman, he paused. Morgan challenged me in ways nobody else ever did. The day he threatened to quit Unforgiven was the day I realized I'd been directing on autopilot for too long. Just doing what worked without questioning why it worked. Morgan made me explain myself, made me defend my choices, made me better. But he almost derailed your film. Clint smiled, that thin, weathered smile that had launched 1,000 westerns. The best collaborators always do. They push you out of your comfort zone, make you fight for your vision, and in the fighting you discover what you really believe. Morgan gave me that gift. I'll never forget it. What would you say to him if he were here right now? Clint thought about it. Thank you for not quitting, for trusting me when I hadn't earned it, for being stubborn enough to fight and wise enough to listen, and for being my friend for 30 years. He paused. Also, I'd tell him he was still wrong about that campfire scene. One take was plenty. It's right there on screen. Perfect. He laughed quietly. But I'd never admit that to his face. He'd be insufferable. That's the story of Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman. Not rivals, not master and student, partners. Two men who found each other at exactly the right moment, challenged each other in exactly the right way, and built something together that neither could have built alone. The day Morgan Freeman threatened to quit Unforgiven was the beginning of one of Hollywood's great friendships. 30 years of collaboration, 4 films, 2 Oscars, and a bond forged in the only way that matters. Through the work, through the conflict, through the willingness to fight for what you believe while remaining open to the possibility that you might be wrong. That's what great partnerships look like. Not agreement, not harmony. Friction that produces heat, heat that produces light, and light that ends up on screen, illuminating truths that neither artist could have found alone. Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby. 2 masterpieces born from a disagreement on a cold day in Canada. All because Morgan Freeman had the courage to push back, and Clint Eastwood had the wisdom to listen.